usually don't play clips on our show, but I think there's one that's really relevant to what you're talking about. So let me play this, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
In honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Okay, there you go. So, I mean, put aside the references to what Hitler and Mussolini said, and the fact that when he talks about these, socialist, fascist, he seems to be condemning the very people that he's praises and wants to emulate. But he's basically saying, Lexi, that the real enemy is not terrorism or Iran or Russia or China. It's your fellow Americans. It's people that live right in this country. So if this is our former president and leading candidate for the Republican nomination to be president again, how do we have anything approaching civility with that type of bombastic rhetoric careening through our system?
It's a great question, a very important question, because when the stakes are really high in times of war, in times of and elections where there's a lot at stake, there is this temptation to dehumanize the other and the threats and those who are different from us. And that's what we saw in that clip, and that's what we've seen across history and across culture. And that is exactly why when we need civility most, when the stakes are really high. I define civility as distinct from mere politeness. It's instead the bare minimum of respect that we are owed and owe to others by virtue of our shared dignity and moral worth as human beings. And we need to keep that dignity of the other front of mind, especially when the stakes are high, especially when we're tempted to dehumanize them, calling them, analogizing them to animals, calling them vermin, because we want to dehumanize them because it makes it easier to do and say whatever is necessary in order to win. And again, we see this across history and across culture. This is not a new phenomenon. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, here's the big question. So how do we apply and implement your principles of civility into our divided political system? As Carrie's heard me say before, right now I'm not a fan of either party, but one party is just way to the left and they're messy, but at least they're democratic. One party is really for authoritarianism, and you have a bunch of people in the House of Representatives, frankly, who you have to be an election denier. You can't be depended on to defend the Constitution, to count it on. So what do you do? I mean, I love what you're saying, but our system needs it more than ever.
It's exactly right. The beauty of American democracy is that the citizen is prior to the institution. It's a citizen-oriented regime, and that's a gift. It's a wonderful attribute. And so I wrote my book for American citizens. I hope that the citizens who read it send it to their public leaders. I hope that public leaders read it, but I didn't write it for the intelligentsia. I didn't write it for public leaders. I wrote it for everyday Americans, so that they can demand better from our public leaders, and so that they can be a part of the solution in their everyday right now. We have way more power and autonomy to be part of the solution than we realize as Americans. When I moved from a very toxic season in Washington politics, 2017 to 2018, I was at the United States Department of Education. I fled. I call myself a refugee from federal government, and moved to Indianapolis, Indiana. I came home from work one day and said to my husband, I'm done with DC, I'm done with Washington, done with government. Let's leave. Let's move to Indiana. And that's where he is from originally. And my husband said, okay, done. No take backs. And a few months later, we'd moved to the Midwest. And when we moved there, one of my first friends, her name was Joanna Taft. She came up to work, up to me after church one day. And she said, hi, I'm Joanna. Would you like to porch with us sometime? And I never heard the word porch used as a verb before, but I was curious and we didn't know many people. So we went to her home that afternoon, and I realized that Joanna is staging a quiet porching revolution from her great big front veranda in the middle, in the heart of Indianapolis. She had curated on her porch that afternoon people across race, across class, geography, politics, not to, talk about our differences point by point in any curated conversation, but just to inhabit a shared space and to sow seeds of trust and friendship across difference that otherwise might never happen. Part of the argument of my book is that this question of how do we do life together across difference, the defining question of my book and the most important question of our day, is also a timeless question. And it's a timeless challenge because of our nature as human beings, defined by an insatiably social impulse, but also a propensity to self-love, which is intention. That is why friendship, community, civilization, democracy is always fragile and never a foregone conclusion. So on one hand, this idea, this question, this challenge is timeless. On the other hand, there are many things about our moment now that are different. For example, it's really easy to just go through life virtually and also physically, like in person, and not really encounter people we don't want to encounter, people who we differ from. We can, in this world of digital nomads, we don't have to leave our home for work. Or when we do go to work, we go from home to car to office and back again. We get our food, groceries delivered to us. We have Netflix. Like, we don't have to leave our house. Everything's curated to us, and we curate our online existences in the same way. And that's a problem for democracy if we're not encountering. And that's something that's also different than past eras, where we were more likely to just kind of spontaneously come into proximity with people of different walks of life. And so that's what's radical and beautiful about Joanna's front porch. And also the fact that she recognizes, this is what she told me, that she said, I can't control what's happening in Washington. I can't control what's being said on the presidential campaign trail. I can't control what's happening across the world, this untold suffering in other parts of the world, but I can control myself. And I'm going to reclaim, my civic sphere of influence and make my community stronger and my family better, and do what I can to be part of the solution in my everyday. So, and what I learned when I was a Novak journalism fellow is that there are people like Joanna doing this across the country, with and without their front porches. They're choosing to reclaim ownership over their civic sphere and say, I can't control what's happening across the world or in Washington, but I can control myself. And change is going to start with me. And that is very much my theory of social change, my theory of how do we, have a better and brighter future for our children. I mean, that's the reason I wrote this book. I have 2 young kids, and I desperately wanted them to grow up in a world that was a little bit more gentle and a little bit brighter. And it does start with us.